the great conservative movement of America and of our time. A brush fire of freedom is being lit all over this country. We, as an irate, tireless American populace, will overcome the few radical leftists that control the levers of power today. Joe Biden's failed economic policies has given us inflation like you can't believe, and the border is in disarray.
It's amazing how few of the people commenting on this have actually bothered to go see what's happening. Well, Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona actually went to the border.
Biggs, where's Andy? Boy, oh boy, Andy. There's a guy. He's tough.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Andy Biggs from Arizona's 5th Congressional District. This is my semi-regular podcast called What's the Biggs Idea? I am honored today to have a philosopher, an energy expert, president and founder of Center for Industrial Progress, which is a positive pro-human alternative to the green movement. He's a graduate of Duke University and author of New York Times bestseller, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, and also this great book right here, looking backwards, was Fossil Future, which I was looking at the back of it. I read it a year ago now, Alex. And as we start, we had Energy Secretary Granholm was in the Oversight Committee this week, and we want to talk about what she said. And I will tell the audience, as I sat down and I was there, and I prepared for this, I thought, man, I just should have called Alex, just to get a few ideas. But I want to read a couple of quotes from Fossil Future, and then I want you to riff on it, and then let's get into Granholm. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so in your book, you say the side effects of fossil fuels have become smaller as the benefits of fossil fuels become greater and greater. You also said, and by the way, you demonstrate this in the book with data and science. You also said, insofar as there are non-reducible negative side effects of rising CO2 levels, fossil fuels still have the potential ability to neutralize those side effects along with any other negative side effects they have. And then you said, whenever we think about the side effects of fossil fuels, we need to keep in mind fossil fuel energy's own proven ability to overwhelm, reduce, and neutralize its own side effects, and recognize that the current overall benefit of fossil fuels, the unprecedented and increasing livability of our world, far, far overwhelms its current decreasing and increasingly neutralized negative side effects. Can you just riff on that for a second, and then let's get into Granholm?
Yeah, so you took a part of the book that I really like, and so I'm glad you raised it. But it is the synthesis of a lot that comes before it. I think it's probably in chapter 4, that part. And I'll just try to break it down a little bit. So the key idea behind a lot of my thinking about energy is that when you're considering energy like any product or technology, you have to carefully weigh both benefits and side effects. And one of the very common errors that's made with regard to fossil fuels is to only consider negative side effects and to ignore benefits as well as positive side effects. So you see this in climate where you only hear about climate negatives. You never hear about climate positives, including things like, well, fewer people dying from cold or global greening, which is a very real phenomenon. Whereas you need to look at both positive and negative. And then crucially with benefits, we're not taught to think about the benefits of fossil fuels overall, but in particular, this is crazy, we're not taught to think about the climate related benefits of fossil fuels in terms of the energy. And yet the energy from fossil fuels makes us incredibly safe from climate danger. This is very well documented. As we've been using more fossil fuel over the last 100 years and adding more CO2 to the atmosphere, the rate of death from climate-related disasters such as storms and floods and extreme temperatures has gone down by a factor of 50. So think about this. The average person is 1/50th as likely to die from a climate-related cause. And the reason is that our ability to master or neutralize climate danger has far outpaced any new climate challenges. So this alludes to one of the points that came up in what you quoted, which is fossil fuels not only have benefits that outweigh their negative side effects, they actually have benefits. This is very unusual, that can neutralize or overwhelm their negative side effects. So if you take an antibiotic and it gives you a rash, the benefit of the antibiotic can still outweigh the negative of the rash, but the antibiotic can't neutralize the rash itself. But fossil fuels, if they, for example, caused it to be warmer than you would like in some region, they can also give you air conditioning. They can also give you better shaded areas, et cetera. So it's a really magical quality that's not at all factored into the thinking. And so it's this crazy thing where fossil fuels have made everything better, including we're way safer from climate. And yet, because people are fossil fuel benefit deniers, they can't see it.
Yeah, that's an amazing thing. So I asked Secretary Granholm about if she could iterate some benefits of fossil fuel, and what this is she gave this rather generic answer. She said the benefits of fossil fuels is that it's dense and it is an important part of our energy mix. That was all she could think of about fossil fuels as what benefits we derive because of fossil fuels. And I think of people who are still burning dung as their energy source, and I think, what would it be like for those people if they had access to, I don't know, some kind of natural gas or something like that? So what's your reaction to her failure to actually because I think you have to reduce this down and break it up so people can actually see what are the specific benefits that we have, and you've iterated those.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing about energy is the specific benefits are all benefits. So it's crucial to break them down. But everything we have in the world, in the wealthy world, is made possible by using machines to do work for us. And we're only able to do that because we have low cost, reliable energy to power the machines. And we're only able to have low cost, reliable energy at a large scale because of fossil fuels. There's nothing that comes close. Granholm's answer of density slightly indicates why. That's one reason of several why they're so uniquely low cost, reliable, and scalable. And so if you think of that, if you recognize, well, everything, our food, our clothing, our shelter, our healthcare, transportation, education, they all depend on low cost, reliable energy. And the lower cost and more reliable energy is, the more plentiful those things are. And the higher cost and less reliable energy is, the more scarce those things are. And to your point, we live in a world where the vast majority of people use a tiny amount of energy by our standards. The benefits of fossil fuels are basically everything we shouldn't take for granted but do in the prosperous world, and everything the poor world needs more of. And with that as the context, it's embarrassing to give such a tepid answer, right? It's like we've found something that increases our life expectancy by decades, and you say it's dense and something else that I can't even remember what she said.
Yeah,
now, by the way, yeah, go ahead.
An important part of our energy mix.
Yeah, it's an important part of our energy mix, and like, yeah. She's not okay. Let's be specific here, Secretary. So it's 80% of our quote energy mix, and it's still growing despite your and others' efforts to destroy it. It's still growing, which means it's so cost effective that even when you try to destroy it, even when you hate it, it still grows. So imagine how much growth you're leaving on the table with all of your restrictions. And then our energy mix refers to an energy pie today that, while decent for us, is way too small overall because the world has way too little energy. So you should really think of it as, this is the only way, as I put it in my book, to bring prosperity and flourishing to a world of 8 billion people. This is our lifeline. Now, in the future, we want to develop even superior alternatives. And I'm a big fan of nuclear. And I think in some decades or generations, it can do a lot of the work. But for the foreseeable future, there's nothing like fossil fuels for making the world a better place for 8 billion people, including, as I indicated, making us safer from climate.
So I really like the words you use, because you use that a lot in your book. And many times I've heard you speak, you talk about flourishing, because the idea behind energy really is to make lives better, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no point in having energy if you're not going to make lives better. And so when you talk about flourishing, so I asked the converse of Secretary Granholm. I said, well, you can't really, you didn't really give us a lot on the benefit side. What can you tell us is the negative aspect of fossil fuel? And the only thing she said was, well, it contributes to climate change. That was it. And I'm like, that's it. So we've got these two rather amorphous, high-level things, and
Right.
she didn't bother to actually go into this thing that you're talking about. Is there a cost-benefit analysis? Can fossil fuels neutralize what people see solely as a negative impact from fossil fuels?
Yeah, and I would just say notice. So you're sort of noticing the dearth of substance to the answer. There's also a dearth of precision to the answer, because think about how vague a term climate change is. This is one of these. My background is philosophy first, energy second, and so one thing I'm very attuned to is when people use vague and/or manipulative terminology, and the term climate change qualifies as this, because notice it's so vague. It doesn't specify, are we talking about man-made change or non-man-made change, or both? And are we talking about modest change or extreme change? And are we talking about positive change, negative change, both? It's just this vague idea of, oh, it's change and it's bad and it has something to do with fossil fuels. Whereas what you want to do is ask the question, what are the climate-related impacts of fossil fuels, positive and negative? And then what are the climate mastery benefits of fossil fuels that can allow us to neutralize and overwhelm any negatives? But if you think of it that way, you almost answer your own question. You start to realize, oh, wait, there aren't negatives on a level that's really a problem, because as we've seen, our ability to master climate using fossil fuels has far outpaced any new challenges. But if you just look at climate change in this vague way out of context, including outside the context of our ability to neutralize climate danger, you can just act like, oh yeah, fossil fuels, they have a little benefit maybe, but on the other hand, they cause climate change and we don't want climate change. I'm like, I'm totally okay with some impact on climate, especially if some of it is positive, if the overall effect is that we're much safer from climate. It's like if there's some bacteria that gets more frequent somehow in circulation, but we have antibiotics easily deal with it, or we can inoculate ourselves from it, that's great. The issue is just the quality of your environment depends on what's in your environment and what's your ability to neutralize or benefit from what's in your environment. With climate, the open secret is just it's better than ever. We're safer from climate than ever.
Yeah, to me it's such a logical argument that you make. I mean, it's just you follow step by step by step. Okay, that's logical. If you were talking to Secretary Granholm, what would you have suggested to her or asked her?
Well, as I said in advance, next time definitely text me in advance, because one of the things I would have brought up is she has a track record of saying we should be keeping fossil fuels in the ground. So I don't know the exact link, but I've posted on Twitter before a clip of her saying this, and I think it was 350.org, which is a super anti-fossil fuel, anti-nuclear group. I think she was speaking to them, or they're praising her for it. So I guess what I would ask her is, what I ask her is basically, this is a little bit of a loaded question, but you're allowed to ask loaded questions. Sort of.
That's all we do ask.
I'm good at answering them. So I try, in this case, I would just ask, because I'd want her to address the substance. I say, how can you continue to participate in and have a leadership role in an administration that is taking national and global action to restrict the availability of fossil fuels that are uniquely able to provide the low-cost, reliable, and scalable energy that billions of people need to survive and flourish and be safe from climate? And how can you continue to do this when we've seen that this has brought about a global energy crisis? Why are you doubling down and tripling down and quadrupling down on this instead of admitting, hey, people like Alex Epstein were right? The benefits of fossil fuels far outweigh the negatives. And so we need to liberate fossil fuels as part of a broader energy freedom agenda instead of restricting fossil fuels as part of an overall energy scarcity agenda. So that would be my loaded question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So her side often says, well, we have more storms because ostensibly because of fossil fuel use, I guess. Mm-hmm. But the question is, are we having more hurricanes? Are we having more tornadoes? Are we seeing more typhoon in the eastern hemisphere? What do you see? Is that the case? And that's number one. But the other response is, are we more able to survive that? More able to survive that?
So that's the one I would ask. I would ask two questions. One is basically your second one. Are we more in danger from storms than we used to be? Like this idea of let's study exactly what's happening with storm patterns. I mean, the cheat sheet is there's not much of a pattern. There's not nearly as much of a pattern as the catastrophists want there to be. So most of their stuff is just projecting into the future. There's certainly nothing resembling a signal that's alarming given our demonstrated ability to protect ourselves from storms. So is storm danger higher or lower? It's definitely lower. We're far, far safer. And we know how to make ourselves far safer and how to make billions of other people far safer, which is just basically keep developing, keep using energy, keep building resilient infrastructure, et cetera. So the one thing I'd ask is, we are safer from storms than ever. That's the thing people need to realize. And then what about the rest of life as affected by fossil fuels? Because we're also safer from drought than ever. We're also safer from dangerous temperatures than ever. And every other aspect of life is better. So food is better, clothing is better, shelter is better, transportation is better, education is better. And this all depends on fossil fuels powering machines to make us productive and prosperous and safe. So you can never look at climate out of context. And as you indicated, you always need to be looking at not just our ability to make things worse, but our ability to make things better. And if you look at it from that perspective, you start to get why I'm like a huge lover of fossil fuels. It's certainly not because I came from the industry or have some fetish or something like this. It's not, I have no particular preference for any form of energy. You just have to recognize this industry today is on a totally different level from every other industry to produce this thing we need, which is low cost, reliable energy.
Yeah. So the naysayers, when they had control, they've effectively put in place the Green New Deal, which is about a $2 trillion cost over about a 5 to 7 year period. And I'll give you, for instance, literally, I think it's $6 billion that Department of Energy was going to put to place battery charging stations for EVs, right? Electric vehicles. They've built 7 of those in 4 states. 7 in 4 states in the last 18 months. What do you see as the Green New Deal, and what my colleagues on the other side are trying to do with money to basically emasculate fossil fuels at the same time that they're not really able to deal with solar, wind, these electric vehicles? They've restricted mining of critical minerals that are necessary to produce the EVs, et cetera.
So I understand there's a focus on subsidies, particularly because I know if you're on oversight, and that makes sense. But to put it in broader perspective, there are kind of 2 basic things the government is doing in energy. They're shackling what works and they're subsidizing what doesn't. And actually, the more damaging one is shackling what works. Because when you subsidize something that doesn't work, you take our money and you put it into some boondoggle, and it doesn't really work very well. So it's not cost effective. It makes things more expensive. But if you shackle things, you artificially restrict the supply. And that's where you can get into huge danger, particularly in a world that needs far more energy. And I'll give you the example of our electric grid, which I wrote recently about. If people want to check out my stuff, just go to alexepstein.substack.com. You can check it out all out free. So we had a piece recently about AI and about how many of the tech giants, whom I admire in many ways, but are pursuing AI, and they're saying, hey, we need way more electricity for AI, to which I say, great. But these same companies like Google and Microsoft and Meta have for years been lobbying against fossil fuels and actually promoting 100% renewable propaganda that claims that we can be 100% renewable. Apple is a big perpetrator here as well, unfortunately. But they've advocated for not only propping up and subsidizing unreliable solar and wind installations, but they've also advocated for reducing the availability of fossil fuels, including shutting down vital coal plants, including the new EPA rule, which we also have something up at alexepstein.substack.com, where they're basically outlawing coal with their new rules. And then they're also outlawing cost-effective natural gas replacements for coal. So we're talking about shutting down around a fifth of our reliable capacity on a grid that has far more demand from AI coming up and a lot of artificial demand from EVs. So you can see there's both the subsidies and the shackling, but the shackling is really the core of it, because the whole goal of this Green New Deal type framework, whatever they call it, Build Back Better, Green New Deal, Inflation Reduction Act, whatever they call it, the core mission, as stated, is to rapidly eliminate fossil fuel use, or they'd put it as rapidly eliminate our CO2 emissions, which in practice means rapidly eliminate fossil fuel use. Even if you throw a few billion at carbon capture, it doesn't change the overall thing. You're rapidly eliminating fossil fuels. So that's the number one thing I want everyone, including our elected officials, to be aware of, is this whole of government climate agenda to rapidly eliminate fossil fuel use. That is the existential threat. The subsidies are terrible, but the shackles are what'll kill us.
Right. No, I think you're right. I'm with you 100%. They've also historically shackled the development of nuclear.
Yes.
And this has really been a problem because nuclear is probably the cleanest fuel source you have, and so
right.
and most efficient as well. So what do you say? What should the policy look like, in your opinion, with regard to nuclear?
Yeah, I mean, nuclear is a real tragedy. It's actually something I'm actively working on right now. I'm working on what I call an energy freedom platform for the United States, with sort of 5 key initiatives and making specific policy recommendations, including executive actions and legislation for each of them. And one of them is what I call unleashing or decriminalizing nuclear energy, because we've basically regulated it to the point where it's almost treated as a criminal enterprise. And to give you to give you the extent of this, it used to take, say, 4 years to build a nuclear power plant here. And now it's 16 and it might be killed. So just think about that alone. Just anyone think about as common sense as an investor. How much does an investment cost if it's going to take 4 years to pay off and you're virtually guaranteed it'll actually go through, versus if it takes 16 years and somebody just might destroy it? Like, the cost of capital is just enormous. This is the major driver for why nuclear has become 10 times more expensive here. And it's far more expensive than it is, say, in South Korea or China, for that matter. And so what we need to do, I mean, fundamentally what we need to do is any kind of oversight agency, such as the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Actually, there's a case for doing at least some nuclear at the state level. But if you have a Nuclear Regulatory Commission, its mission should be the safe proliferation of nuclear energy. Its current mission is just eliminating all imagined nuclear risk at all costs. And so what they do is they set all these crazy risk thresholds that make no sense and are not based on science. They try to infinitely reduce the risk of nuclear. And what they do is then they prevent you from building nuclear, but that means you have to use far riskier technologies than nuclear, which are all the other technologies. So you need to have science-based standards for radiation, because radiation is not always dangerous. It's actually safe or benign, or even sometimes beneficial in small quantities. And then it's dangerous in certain quantities. So set standards based on where it's dangerous. Don't just infinitely reduce radiation. There's all sorts of crazy things. There's something called a LARA, as low as reasonably achievable. That needs to be thrown out. That basically says if it's possible to reduce radiation without and nuclear is still competitive with alternatives, then you should always raise the price of nuclear to make it competitive with alternatives. Well, what happens is, if you do that, every time alternatives go up, nuclear has to ratchet up, but it never ratchets back down. So this is all sorts of crazy things. But basically, we need science-based standards, and we need a government that recognizes that nuclear energy is good and that it should be expedited as quickly as possible, not slowed down in the name of false safety concern. And if you did that, you could really have a revolution here.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to nuclear engineers who tell me that they think you can make these the power very compact, so your reactors are compact, small. They can power small regions, even down to the neighborhood level, for just a very low cost. But they can't go forward with even all of the discussion, debate, research that they have to go forward to, because they're regulated out of the place, and that's what's going on. And man, that kind of regulation gets back to your point that the shackles on actually prevent you from doing what you want to do. The subsidies, they just bankrupt us, but the shackles prevent us from making things better so we could deal with the cost of the bankruptcy program that's going on.
Yeah, and the shackles ultimately bankrupt you the most because they restrict production, and without production, you're poor. Yeah, I'd say with the nuclear, we're seeing a shift where people are becoming more enthusiastic about nuclear, which is good. But we need to really focus on removing the shackles, because you see, you mentioned small modular reactors, we have a lot of enthusiasm for those, but none of them are actually getting built. And I think there's only one kind that's even approved. And so we just need to recognize the current regime is totally unscientific. It's totally illogical. And, in the next few months or so, I'm going to start to share some stuff publicly for how I think we should do fundamental reform. Unfortunately, often what even Republicans will do is they won't challenge the shackles enough. And then they'll say, hey, let's give nuclear some subsidies. But if you just give subsidies, it's not going to scale. And so that doesn't work. What you need is if you want alternatives to fossil fuels, which I do just because I want more energy in the world, that's my real reason for wanting alternatives. You need to figure out how to unshackle them to make them truly cost competitive with fossil fuels. Subsidizing them, restricting America's fossil fuel use, which is our government's brilliant strategy, that does nothing globally. China's still building 300 new coal plants right now because that's the cheapest thing. If you want to change that, let people figure out a cheaper way to generate energy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as always, Alex, I'm sorry. I think we're out of time. I'm getting the hook over here, but I will tell you, as always, you provide such great information because you have a positive outlook on fossil fuels and how to maximize the benefit and look for greater benefits and even alternatives such as nuclear to see what we can do to actually benefit and, as you always say, make life more flourishing for everybody, because there's a lot of people in America struggle, but there are billions, as you know and I know, that they're still burning dung and other things for their fuel, and that prevents them from having good health, good quality of life, sanitation. Their happiness quotient goes down. All of those things become a bit of a problem. So I am grateful for your leadership on this, and I hope that you continue to be an advocate for this going forward. I know you take it on the chin. I know people attack you all the time, but
no, I would say no. I'm very happy doing it, and I would say to other people, don't be afraid of getting in this. The rewards far outweigh the negatives. So I'm a very happy warrior. So I'm not a martyr. So I would just say, I would encourage others to join the fight. So I mentioned my Substack, alexepstein.substack.com. You can follow me on Twitter, but I would just say these ideas that I'm sharing, these ways of thinking, are very effective at persuading people. And so I hope that some of the listeners use them. And I'm very glad that you're starting to ask. I'm glad to see representatives start asking questions like, what about the benefits of fossil fuels? In my experience, it didn't used to happen. So if I've played a role in that, I'm very happy to have.
You did. You definitely influenced me there. Alex, you can be followed on X at Alex Epstein, or go to www.fossilfuture.com or energytalkingpoints.com. You got Substack as well.
Yep, those are all good.
Great. And then if you want to follow me, you can go to @RepAndyBiggsAZ, or truth @RepAndyBiggsAZ, or at biggs.house.gov. But Alex, thanks for taking time out. Thanks for continuing to engage in this fight. It is one of the most important issues of our time, because basically all of our life results from how we can afford energy. I mean, whether it's paying gas at the pump or paying for your heating fuel, all of this. I appreciate it, Alex. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And we'll get back together again soon, I hope.
Awesome. Sounds great.